Everyone, if we could take our seats, please. Grab a sandwich if you'd like, and let's take our seats.
John.
Hello, how are you? Good, how are you? Late. I'm late for these. Really missed that beer. I figured that.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? We're having a little problem with the mic, so I have to. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Joel Fishman, President of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. It is my privilege, on behalf of the University of Southern California Annenberg Center on Communication Leadership and Policy, the George Washington University Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, and the PDCA to welcome you here today. We are honored to pay tribute to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. PDCA and its predecessor, PDAA, have sponsored long-standing programs awarding practitioners for excellence in the implementation of public diplomacy. Last year, we added a new category to recognize chiefs of mission and other senior officers for their leadership in public diplomacy. Today is another first for PDCA. The organizers of today's program are Gordon Duguid, co-chair of the PDCA Program Committee, and PDCA Vice President Larry Wallers. Our tech hosts today are Gabby Stahl, PDCA Tom Tuck Graduate Fellow, and Devani Guerrero, GWU Program Coordinator. For those participating online, Gabby will be monitoring your questions for the panel in the Q&A box. Please use the chat box only for technical questions. For the past 4 years, Secretary Blinken has been an indefatigable messenger for the United States. In all his engagement with leaders and peoples of the world, he has been mindful, in his own words, for both our interests and our value. Professor Joe Nye, who coined the term soft power, told us at this forum just last week, quote, "I think the pillars of soft power are a country's own domestic values as well as how it practices them," unquote. Secretary Blinken, son of parents who escaped oppression in Europe, knows this in his very bones. He has been an exemplar of public engagement with the world. Let's run the video.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of my State Department colleagues, I'm honored to accept this award. Throughout my career, and especially these last 4 years as Secretary of State, I've witnessed the unmatched power and reach of our public diplomacy. I've met young women in Morocco, kicking off STEM careers through our educational programs. I've spoken with foreign journalists who benefited from our training initiatives and tried to answer their tough questions. I've seen how sharing intelligence with our foreign partners in the public, like revealing Russia's plans to invade Ukraine, helped counter lies and disinformation, forge trust with partners, and develop a stronger collective response. In a more contested, competitive, and combustible world, with state and non-state actors working to shape global narratives and undermine the objective truths on which open societies depend, the work of telling America's story, proactively, authentically, strategically, is more important than ever. Public diplomacy helps build understanding between citizens of the United States and other countries. It strengthens our network of allies and partners. It unlocks new possibilities and friendships for people and for nations. At the same time, public diplomacy allows us to expose, disrupt, deter foreign interference and manipulation, and to help repair the fissures that those who sow falsehoods aim to exploit. In short, public diplomacy is not just nice to do, it's essential to our foreign policy. That's why, over the last 4 years, we've worked to reinvest in and reimagine our public diplomacy. As the world emerged from the COVID pandemic, the State Department not only restored international exchanges, we set enrollment records. We launched new efforts like our Global Music Diplomacy Initiative to harness the power of art to bring people together. We promoted digital and media literacy to empower citizens to distinguish fact from fiction online. We improved the reach and sophistication of our public messaging, from hiring the department's first Mandarin language spokesperson to leveraging podcasts and influencers to explain our efforts, to providing more training for locally employed staff, indispensable guides everywhere we work. None of this would have been possible without the State Department's talented and creative public diplomacy professionals, the locally employed staff, the contractors, the civil servants, the foreign service officers, who do their jobs with so much heart and dedication, often under extremely difficult circumstances. Our diplomats don't just talk about American values, they model them every day. It's been the honor of my life to serve alongside them. Thank you to the Public Diplomacy Council of America for recognizing our efforts and for your continued partnership.
Hi, everybody.
Stephanie Sutton, is this working?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Stephanie Sutton, not a stranger to this forum, currently serves as Acting Assistant Secretary for the State Department Bureau of Global Public Affairs. Stephanie will be representing the Secretary today.
No pressure. Totally fine.
For extraordinary leadership in public diplomacy, Antony J. Blinken, United States Secretary of State, in recognition of your leadership in elevating diplomacy's global public outreach and engagement, and your vigorous public articulation of United States foreign policy. No, it's the boss here.
Especially guy with the camera. And just because.
Mike's gonna behave itself. Okay, here's what's going to happen next. I will introduce the panel. They will each give opening remarks. Ambassador Tony Wayne, who is PDCA co-chair of the awards committee co-chair, will say a few words, and then I will start the questioning for the panel. Stephanie Sutton previously served as Chief of Staff in the Office of the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs and Chief of Staff in IIP, the Bureau of International Information Programs. Before coming to the department, Stephanie led external affairs and advocacy at Global Ties US, well known to many of us, the country's oldest and largest citizen diplomacy network. And as Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff at Edelman, where she led corporate reputation and public affairs for the Fortune 100 companies, global foundations, and top-ranked universities. Larry Schwartz is a PDCA board member and a strategic communication and global management consultant with media and association clients in the US and the Middle East. Larry retired from the State Department after a 34-year career, culminating in his role as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. His most recent overseas assignments include Egypt, Pakistan, and India. He also launched and co-chaired the 38 Nation Communications Working Group of the Global Coalition formed to defeat the Islamic State, ISIS, and served as U.S. spokesperson in Israel during peace negotiations and summits following the Oslo Accords. We'll stop with Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Joel. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. So nice to be here. It's a real honor to be here on behalf of Acting Undersecretary Lee Satterfield. I'm absolutely thrilled PDCA is recognizing the Secretary for his many contributions to public diplomacy over the course of the last 4 years. Thank you to Joel. Thank you to Larry. Thank you to Ambassador Wayne. Larry Schwartz is someone with whom I worked when I was Chief of Staff in IIP many moons ago. He's someone who I deeply respect, and it's a real honor to be sitting here with him today. So look, you heard the Secretary from day one. He's seen public diplomacy as central to everything we work to accomplish at the Department of State. He's a former journalist. He immediately reinstated the Department press briefing. He established the expectation that public diplomacy, hi Sarah, be at both the takeoff and the landing of all of our conversations. His sustained advocacy for public diplomacy as a central pillar of our funding request meant that PD over the course of the past 4 years has experienced a relatively stable budget in an otherwise volatile environment. He showed the centrality of public diplomacy during his travels, people-to-people engagements, leveraging messaging opportunities. He met with members of our Y networks, our youth networks, Yali, Yseli, Ylai, Ytili, all of them, positioned cultural policy as security policy through cultural heritage programs, sports diplomacy programs, the global music diplomacy initiative that he mentioned in his video. And we welcomed a record number of international students just this year, as you heard him say. And today, I'm really, really proud to say that there is a broad recognition across the department that public diplomacy, and ideally more of it, is critical to achieving policy outcomes. On the sidelines of the Summit for Democracy last March in Seoul, the Secretary delivered a landmark speech on building healthy and resilient information environments. Some of you heard me speak about this before, but he outlined the challenges of the information environment and specifically where state and non-state actors undermine objective truths on which open societies depend. You heard him say the same thing in his video remarks just now. We're nothing if not on message. In those remarks, he articulated how public diplomacy builds healthier, more resilient information environments through both defensive and offensive approaches, cutting edge technologies, new platforms, but in parallel with more traditional public diplomacy tools like English language programs, which the Secretary himself has described as our best export, exchanges, youth networks, the things that fundamentally build trust with audiences overseas. He placed public diplomacy officers, PAOs, public affairs officers overseas at the center of addressing this policy priority and instructed chiefs of mission to have PAOs overseas lead interagency working groups to address the challenges of the information environment. This is a big deal. For the first time, public diplomacy owns a foreign policy priority. I cannot stress this enough. This is the product of a lot of work, the support of the Secretary, and I'm really, really proud that we were able to get this done. In fact, interagency leadership is a hallmark of Secretary Blinken's tenure. You may be aware that last year, just about a year ago, Secretary of Defense Austin reinstated Chief of Mission concurrence on certain information operations. As a result, public affairs officers overseas are now shaping those, advising their leadership overseas on how best to advance messaging opportunities, foreign policy priorities through these information operations. Building on a successful model at Indo-PACOM in Honolulu, we from the ARC Front Office invested in PD liaison officers at select global combatant commands to drive message alignment and maximize resources with our Department of Defense colleagues. And finally, I'm really proud that under the Secretary's leadership, we've advanced a vision of modern public diplomacy, one that is audience-driven, data-informed, policy-centric, one that prioritizes our people, and one that leverages emerging technologies. Through our public diplomacy staffing initiative, we future-proofed our workforce. We are able to reach audiences where they are, on the platforms most relevant to them, and with messages and messengers that resonate. We secured the ability for PD teams to work with contractors to understand narratives on TikTok. We established an influencer team to maximize the reach of our messages. We strengthened our crisis planning and preparedness apparatus to promote and protect PD equities. We've offered training opportunities to both American and locally employed staff, thanks to the Secretary's culture of continuous learning. My team developed North Star, our AI-enabled media monitoring platform, aligned to the Secretary's embrace of emerging technologies. And I'm really proud that this particular platform has the ability to save upwards of 180,000 staff hours annually. Looking ahead to the transition, my last day on Monday, we're proud to pass the incoming administration a team with the skills and tools necessary to build trust with key audiences. So, on behalf of our 5,000 strong global workforce, my colleagues, thank you for the time. Thank you. And thank you to the Secretary for his leadership. I look forward to your questions.
Not to Larry.
That was great stuff. I'm going to step back just a little bit and look at things from the PDCA's perspective. This town is awash this week in people sort of reviewing one administration and pre-critiquing the next administration. Those of us who worked, I'm sorry. How can I help?
Put it closer to you.
Okay.
There.
Okay. How's that?
That's
Is that
better.
better? Okay. So I'd like to re-begin with the PDCA is a nonpartisan professional association of people concerned with public diplomacy. It's a critical element in our foreign policy, as Stephanie mentioned, and it's complex work for many people. We're the American influencers. If you want to use a millennial term, this week, Washington is full of people talking about how great or the achievements of their administration, and other people who are ignoring the achievements of the first administration and touting what they intend to do in the future. This is a normal phenomenon of transitions. And we've seen this every single time. Right? But we understand that foreign affairs career professionals sometimes work in stressful and bizarrely competitive environments. And while it's so important and so challenging, foreign affairs is never done. It's never over. And so there's always some successes and there are always new challenges. But we need to remember to say thank you to the people who have done so much work on behalf of our nation. In our view, there are many people at the State Department who deserve our thanks. And because they engage in the global public outreach to advance our national interests and address contemporary problems. PDCA board has resolved to acknowledge members of the public diplomacy community for their hard work. But here today, we're prepared to thank Secretary Blinken for his creative use of public diplomacy based on his natural instinct for broad public engagement and his support for the State Department's public diplomacy team and programs as elements of his foreign policy leadership. Because foreign affairs are never done, and because so many of the challenges our nation faces will be important also for the next administration, I'm sure that the next secretary will be quickly swept up in the public diplomacy work as well. Meanwhile, we thank Secretary Blinken for his PD engagement, including in areas that require great challenges. So there are a few points that I'd like to make about what that kind of work has been and what it will be. It starts with character. Secretary Blinken has demonstrated one of the most important skills of effective diplomacy, a respectful engagement with his counterparts, with Congress, with the American people, and with the staff of the State Department. Even as he faced some of the world's most difficult international interlocutors and problems, the Secretary, supported by the Department, sustained an image of America's global leadership as unafraid, prepared, engaged, and relentless. Strengthening engagement and partnerships, of course, the Secretary is proud of how much work he's done to engage our allies in so many areas, and this is true. PDCA endorses the view that the Secretary has expressed and successive secretaries of defense have expressed that to prevent war, we need more and better diplomacy and to save lives, which is a very important priority. The secretary's tenure has been marked by a vigorous effort to strengthen ties and cooperation with allies and partners, and it was welcomed by world leaders, and it's redounded to the credit of the United States. Sadly, the current year is plagued by many wars, including some that diplomacy has not yet been able to resolve. Yet the Secretary's vigorous efforts to engage with and strengthen relations with our allies and partners, particularly NATO and Europe and in the Asia-Pacific region, have developed new webs of cooperation that have yielded greater appreciation of America's image as a partner of choice for shared challenges. The Secretary has been very effective in public affairs. And I'm glad I can say that with Stephanie here. He's done this hard work personally through his indefatigable travels to 86 countries where he's regularly made time for engagement with both foreign media and non-government audiences. The Secretary and his public affairs team deserve credit for the blizzard of public readouts or statements that we get if we're paying attention, and from his many calls and meetings. The State Department's daily press briefing has been reinstated under the Secretary, and I cannot tell you, those of you who are working in public diplomacy know this, but I can't tell the rest of you how important this event is. It's kind of routine, seems sometimes kind of boring. You feel like you're giving too much time and attention to a voracious and sometimes contentious in-house State Department press corps. But the larger universe of journalists, pundits, podcasters, blogs, and global media use the State Department's press briefing transcript or the briefing itself. They coordinate policy across our large and complex national security community. They serve as precise guidance to our ambassadors and spokespersons abroad. They inform foreign embassies and governments about U.S. intentions, and they document U.S. foreign policy for historians. We live in a world of globalized and varied media. People interested in U.S. policy leadership use the State Department's various public affairs tools and the U.S. Agency for Global Media to understand what our government is thinking, and this is critical. It will continue to be important work. Engaging beyond government. In Paris recently, the Secretary quoted Alexis de Tocqueville who was observing early America, saying that the health of a democracy, the health of democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by private citizens. He went on saying we have to continue working with other countries to adapt, to learn from each other, to work together, to make each other better. And this is surely true. In acknowledging that the real power of our country lies with the extraordinary capabilities of the American people, Secretary Blinken has highlighted and supported another element that's a very important tool of public diplomacy. Having lived and studied abroad as a young person, the Secretary understands cross-cultural communications and has regularly cited the importance of international exchanges and students. He believes, and we believe, that public diplomacy exchanges facilitate the engagement of Americans with international experts in a way that strengthens our country and keeps us a partner of choice for people everywhere. Our diplomats gain extraordinary leverage from the tools that public diplomacy provide. The prestigious Fulbright scholarships and Ivy exchange programs that the department manage, among others, bring great credit to our country and connect Americans with the very best people overseas with funds that are largely spent in the United States. They're a core function of effective diplomacy. Okay, now the ongoing parts. Public information and the national security competition that we face now. We're all aware the United States is facing a new set of challenges that have emerged in recent years. A small number of countries, principally Russia, but with the partnership of Iran and North Korea and China, have been aggressively challenging the United States' interests and values. China has expressed the desire to replace the United States. The world's many unresolved issues offer propaganda opportunities for those who seek to undermine the United States leadership. And of course, new technologies have made this more easy. During the secretary's tenure, public diplomacy teams have stepped up with reports exposing foreign governments who are directing information warfare against the United States. And the team has completed over 20 agreements to fight information manipulation with allies and partners. That's what the State Department does. It's a challenge that will need to be met with additional staffing and resources by the Congress, as America's silence in the face of systematic slander and lies is a recipe for disaster. And of course, the social media companies are now sort of newly freed from, in a world, freed from factual oversight. And so the media will continue to expand in this way. Challenge will grow. And finally, I guess meeting people where they are. Those of us who believe in the power of public diplomacy acknowledge Secretary Blinken's leadership in urging the department forward to help address contemporary international issues that are not traditional foreign affairs matters, but they affect people's lives. Here's a partial list of very practical long-term issues on which the department is engaged, all of which have a public diplomacy element. Fair trade and worker protections, securing supply chains for critical items like semiconductors and medicines, safeguarding digital infrastructure to protect threats to our privacy and data, to ensure that our critical infrastructure is kept safe, international safeguards for emerging technologies like and for protecting the environment, for technologies like AI, of course, protecting the environment, preventing another pandemic, stopping the global flow of synthetic drugs, contending with historic migrations across our hemisphere and the globe. The State Department's involved in working all of these things, and the American interests are being considered for around the world. Although the Department of Public Affairs machinery has documented this important work, much more needs to be done to highlight American contributions and draw the attention of the global publics to these matters. Public diplomacy officers have assumed this communications challenge, yet the department's current staffing and resources are wholly inadequate. Secretary Blinken's had a commendable record in public diplomacy, enhancing America's image in the world while building networks of partnerships and supporting his team communicating with global partnerships, the global publics. He's also taken the department into new areas that will require the kind of systematic engagement and investments the United States must make to bring global audiences along with their governments to our vision. We offer our thanks to the Secretary, and we've presented him with this award. I'll conclude by saying that the Secretary-designate, Senator Rubio, is well known to many of us from his work on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he's expressed his interest and friendship for public diplomacy in the past. I believe his confirmation hearing is taking place today. But anyway, PDCA looks forward to working with him, with the Congress, with our friends at the department, towards strengthening America's global leadership. And we also hope that the Secretary-designate will appoint an experienced senior leader as Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs to support his own efforts to assure America's security and further strengthen our global leadership. On behalf of PDCA, I want to thank the members of the Undersecretary's staff here today, who've been good partners in organizing this event. We hope you guys get a new boss soon, who will help lead our community forward. So thank you very much.
Ambassador Tony Wayne is co-chair of PDCA Awards Committee.
So just oh yeah, that's great.
think you can step up.
Uh,
All right, let's stand close together. Thanks for this opportunity to come up and join. It's been great. I've happily known Tony Blinken since he was a very young man coming to the US mission to the European Union. And it had just become the European Union when he came there. And this was a good place to come and think about all of our diplomacy, but then also how public diplomacy played with that. Because the European Union was all about reaching out to others across Europe, back to the United States, other places in the world. It was very similar in a lot of ways to part of what we tried to do in the public diplomacy part of the State Department. And it was not, as we could say, it wasn't burdened at that moment with having to worry about the public security and the built-in alliances, but it was more talking about what are the values that tie people together? What are the things that we do to reach other people? How can we build these networks? And then, of course, we did do this work with NATO, with the bilateral missions across Europe, and this grew over these years. But when Tony Blinken first came, it was the mid-1990s, we were exploring what we were doing. He was exploring with us. He was a young guy coming in and working with us. It was a lot of fun. Then I had the great pleasure of getting to know him again when he was on the SFRC, working for some guy named Biden at that time. It was some senator up there. And then came back during the Obama administration to work both at the NSC and then at the State Department, and started living all of these things and living this combination of messages, which is getting our substance out there and finding ways to engage people. Because what he learned during working with Europe in the 1990s is the importance of engaging people and getting them involved in everything that's going on, because diplomacy was becoming much more a people-oriented enterprise. And then after his period working at the NSC and at the State Department, he got to come back and do a little something else. And so he learned from all these years the importance of having public diplomacy fully integrated into what was being done by the United States in its outreach to the world, that you couldn't separate reaching out publicly from reaching out privately. They all had to be in sync. They had to reinforce each other. He's done a great job in doing that. We've heard a bunch of the lessons, the good lessons that we'll keep learning. And I trust that the new administration is going to learn from this also, maybe a little bit in their own way, but they're going to take some of this and keep building. And we're just going to get stronger and stronger in this ability to reach out, to touch people, to involve them with us, to build allies around the world, and to counter those who are having different views of the way that we interact with people. And so the tasks are immense, but it's really great to have this opportunity to recognize Tony Blinken and his whole team at all different levels, both those who have come in to join us from other experiences, those who, like me, have risen up during the learning period and learned things along the way, learned how to use public diplomacy. We've worked with our PD Cone colleagues to see how the different aspects of this work can really reinforce each other, can become stronger and stronger. And we look forward to the United States getting better and better at delivering these messages. Thank you very much.
Okay, panel.
Joel, let's see if there's anybody else here who has experience working with the secretary, would like to speak first. Is there anybody?
Is there anyone here who has worked with the secretary who would like to offer a few remarks? Okay, let me start off with a first question. If you had another 4 years, what is it that you feel still needs to be done? I'm not asking, and Larry, what would you like to see the secretary and the department be able to do? I am not asking for a prescription for the new administration. We're in the current administration. What is it that you feel is still undone? If there is anything.
You asking me?
Both of it.
No, Stephanie, I'll let you go first.
It's funny. I came here directly from the secretary's Middle East speech at the Atlantic Council, and he has a line in there where he says, "I wish I could tell you that we did everything right. We did not." That's very much the same here, right? Like we never get it completely right. But I am really proud of the progress that we've made. Had I been fortunate to have another 4 years, couple of things that sort of rise to the top, continuing to equip and empower the global PD team. I mentioned TikTok. That's something that my team worked on for about 1.5 years. Really pushed a boulder uphill to secure exceptions for PD practitioners, primarily overseas, to be able to leverage a platform that is increasingly a source of primary information for audiences everywhere, but primarily young audiences. And that's obviously a critical demographic for public diplomacy engagement. Those exceptions are progress, but they are not perfect. Our PD teams will be able to monitor and analyze narratives on TikTok thanks to the work of contractors. They'll be able to work with content creators and pay content creators to deploy factual messaging on their TikTok accounts, recognizing that in many places, that's the only way that people want to work with us. But again, it's not perfect, right? We're still not able to be on this platform, rightly or wrongly. We can have a conversation about that, where people are getting information. But it is material progress, and I'm really proud of that. Another thing that I would have focused on is expanding our Hub Plus model. So y'all may be familiar with our media hubs. We have them in Johannesburg, in Bangkok, in London, all over. And in Brussels, we've been able to establish something called a Hub Plus model. And that is where our teams on the ground, we've augmented our hub teams, and they work with posts in the region to develop bespoke communications campaigns aligned to foreign policy priorities. I'm really proud that one of the first things that I did when I came into this global public affairs seat was ask our global media team where they would put the next Hub Plus. And they said Bangkok. And I said, okay, how much does that cost? They said, probably like $100,000. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's do it. Like that is something we should absolutely do. And these hubs are a great tool, both for folks here in Washington, but also for our teams in the field, and really allow them to reach local journalists, local populations, and communicate messages directly. Another thing that I would have done, build trust with a larger network of global sort of like grassroots allies, and that's where our youth networks come in. One of the things that I very much wanted to do when I was still in the R front office, and this is very much more in the R purview, so not GPA, was sort of knit together those global youth networks, those regional youth networks, to create a global youth network. I thought that was a real area of opportunity. And had I been fortunate enough to have another 4 years, that's absolutely something that I would have worked to get done. And then finally, really leverage big events. We're coming up on the mega decade of sports. We have the Olympics and Paralympic Games in Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, the World Cup all over the place. So really thinking about how to leverage those from a PD perspective. And then of course, Expo. We're coming up on Expo 2025 in Osaka this coming spring. Unfortunately, we did not receive a congressional appropriation to fund that. And had I been fortunate enough to have another 4 years, that would have been something that we'd been focused on as well. Really securing that funding, making the case to our friends on Capitol Hill that Expo 2025 Osaka represents our best opportunity to directly engage audiences from the PRC. Like 1 million+ visitors from the PRC are anticipated to travel to our pavilion in Osaka. That's a tremendous opportunity for us. And we'd hope to be able to secure some funding for that. And we were unable to do so. We figured out how to fund it. Obviously, we bought our own messaging and figured it out. But it's not a perfect solution. So those are the things I would say.
You're giving me a chance. So, well, I mean, there's things about public diplomacy I would like to see change. There's some things about foreign policy I'd like to see change. I have been terribly distressed by the crushing damage and loss of life taking place in the Middle East, in Gaza specifically, but also Lebanon. I spent so many years of my career working on Middle East peace issues. I don't know if 4 years will do it. I don't know if generations will do it, but stopping this terrible cycle of violence in the Middle East would be my favorite idea to work on. In public diplomacy, I would really like to see the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, that I love very much, slim down its offerings. There's over 100 exchange programs, and I would like to see them have fewer, better funded exchanges. We can talk about this ad nauseum, but it's something that I feel very strongly about. I notice that we have ourselves spread too thin, and when you try to do everything, you end up not doing things well. Also, I would like to see a revision. I would like to see in every PAO's job requirements that they work on cultural property agreements between the United States and their host governments. We deserve credit for, and our own diplomacy as public diplomacy officers, we need to negotiate agreements that will protect America's image that for not accepting into our country stolen cultural artifacts that come from around the world. And it's just disgraceful that in 30 or more years, we have not signed cultural property agreements protecting the history of the world with more countries than we've had since 1970, I believe, was the UNESCO agreement. There's somebody here from IO, is that correct? From the IO Bureau? Okay. UNESCO, we need to be active in UNESCO and lead UNESCO. We need to build a strong American committee for UNESCO. So there are lots, we could go on, gosh, but I think I'll stop.
Okay.
Can I say two things to Larry's very good points? So on ECA slimming down its offerings, we actually agree. We 100% agree. That's actually something we've taken to our friends on Capitol Hill. And as you can imagine, everyone on Capitol Hill has a thought or an opinion about a named program for their uncle or their aunt in whatever town in the United States. So that's what's actually proven to be very difficult for us to move forward, but 1000% agree. The other thing that I would note is that under acting under Secretary Satterfield's leadership, then Assistant Secretary Satterfield, we actually have done quite a bit in terms of cultural property agreements, cultural heritage. That's been a tremendous area of focus for her, to the point that we actually increased our budget for the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation just this year by several $1 million. So completely agree. And hope that that will continue to be a focus moving forward.
Stephanie, your comments about the exchange programs on the Hill brought a smile.
Or a tear.
Very familiar. Ambassador Larry Wallers is Vice President of PDCA. I'm good. Larry, I'm going to ask you to come up and share the one mic with me.
Can do it there? Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your remarks. Quite fascinating. I have a somewhat open-ended question for you. Our colleagues in the military regularly, every decade or so, they have to take a look at changes in the conduct of military affairs that force them to say, ooh, our great weapons, the ones we've always used, have been superseded by new tactics and new strategy, and they are forced to have a robust debate about what they call the revolution in military affairs. And it's something that doesn't happen only or even primarily in government. It's a robust debate that happens across the public and private spheres, and that's important. If you look at public diplomacy today, you can see obviously the Russians, the Chinese, and others have invested enormously in recent years on being much more impactful around the world, in shaping the narrative through which foreign publics understand the world. And you can look at different things they do in different places. I'll just draw one example, which is across the Sahel, which is one area I know well, and where if you look at the last decade, the Russians have been extremely successful in getting publics of the Sahel to say, you, the Russians, are our friends, the West, the US, are our enemies. They've been extremely effective at this, and they haven't done it with exchanges. They haven't done it with public affairs offices and their embassies. They've created a really innovative use of tools. Yes, disinformation, but not just disinformation. A lot of on-the-ground work with young people and students, using the military, working with leaders, and yes, there are covert corruption, et cetera. Bringing it together in a way that has been quite successful, and yet they actually spend much less in some actual support of people in the Sahel than we and our Western allies do. So my question, and this is something I've been thinking about, is this something that is just a one-off? Is it something that we can adapt to by tweaking what we've always done, a little bit different exchanges, et cetera? Or are we actually in the middle of a revolution in public diplomacy affairs, a revolution in how narratives are shaped, that our existing tools, which pretty much stem from the 1960s, really aren't good enough for anymore, and we really need to have that debate ourselves? Sorry, a long question.
No. Look, it's an important one. Okay, so I would say a couple of things. First and foremost, we need more money. We are outspent by the PRC, by Russia, who are constantly echoing each other's messages. So full stop, we need more money. We need more people. The other thing that I would say, and some of you heard me say this before, but the playing field is obviously uneven. We are never going to play by the same rules that Russia and the PRC play by. We're just not going to. And that's because the way that I think about our public diplomacy is that our value proposition is fundamentally different from what Russia and the PRC offer. And that is, we offer trust. We show up, we expose, disrupt, deter foreign malign influence. We share factual messaging through trusted messengers. We build long-term relationships. That's what we do. We can do it through a variety of different platforms. We can do it aligned to a variety of different audiences, but fundamentally what we do is we build trust. I don't think we're necessarily in a revolution, a public diplomacy revolution. I think that some of our oldest tools, like English language programs, we need more of, so that audiences in the Sahel can access information from AP or Reuters or trusted purveyors of news that aren't Xinhua. And I'm just going to come back to where I started, is that we need more money. Do we need to do a better job of prioritizing? Probably. You know, I would note for this group that a couple of years ago, we actually sought to make historic investments in terms of our AF staffing footprint, and it didn't make it up to the hill. And that's a miss. That's a miss. We sought to strengthen every public affairs section on the continent and eliminate single officer posts. So no more one PD person shops, right? Make sure that, you know, PAOs were there with someone else, so they weren't carrying this burden on their own. And we weren't able to get it done, but it's not for lack of trying. And it's not for, so maybe I'm gonna revise what I said earlier. That's something we probably should have done. But, you know, and this probably comes full circle in terms of, a missed opportunity for us, and that's really educating Congress a bit better. We made a lot of progress here. We did things like virtual staff dells. You know, we would bring members and their staff to our global PD convenings, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So in any case, but we need more money.
I totally agree, Stephanie. And I appreciate your remarks and I agree with them. But I do want to say to the people who are watching, not here, maybe at the department, also the people who are here, to tell Larry and others who are constantly talking about renovating public diplomacy and diplomacy for the new generation and all these nonsense things. People, it's the same job. You go out and you advance your national interests, and you do it in ways that make sense for where you are. Americans, we go to our posts, we don't even meet half of our predecessors most of the time. We have bosses who are on transmit and not on receive. I mean, we live in large bureaucracies, which are not the problem of some of these other adversarial countries. And we live in a country where we're already at each other's throats, even before a new administration begins. This has got to stop. You know, if America is going to continue its global leadership, we have to get our act together. We have to focus on what we can achieve. We have to build consensus around it, and we have to go out and do it. And this requires active support of outside players like the PDCA and others who are interested in public diplomacy, of our foreign affairs teams who are out there in the world trying to address real problems for the American people. I cannot, at the end, I had 32 years in the Foreign Service, and all I can say is I have a very, very deep respect for the people who have to go out there every day and talk to people around the world about America. Keep yourselves wrapped in the American flag. Remember that no one elected you to be the spokesman for the United States in anything that you want to talk about. It's not about your policy, stupid. It's about the government's policy. So we have a new administration. It's not going to be actually as radically different as the last administration or the one before it or the one before it. In fact, our foreign policy has been remarkably consistent over time with variations of things that have had to happen. Since 2001, we've been terribly focused on terrorism and heavily invested in the Middle East. Tony, you were the DCM in Afghanistan. I served in Pakistan, and when I was in the South Asia Bureau, I was in Afghanistan many times. And all I can say is we've spent billions of dollars to try and bring peace and security, stability and democracy to Afghanistan. We did not succeed. So we constantly need to be thinking through what we're doing to try and critique our work honestly among each other and to build consensus among the American people and our Congress about what we're trying to achieve. Or otherwise, we can spend billions of more dollars and we can waste billions of more dollars in an effort to do something that we cannot do. So it's up there.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? Carl,
Do I need to come up there?
why don't we try, speak very loud?
All
Yeah.
right. Carl Stoltz from formerly with the Global Engagement Center, which is now the toxic waste dump of the interagency.
That is not how we're messaging it. Just so you-
Internal audience is something. No, but I appreciate the secretary's remarks about the success in his tenure of exposing some of Russia's games, particularly lying about the war in Ukraine. appreciate your message, Stephanie, and your support for the GEC over the last 4 years with me. And Larry, you also highlighted in your remarks how important it was. Unfortunately, as a victim of disinformation itself, because there was a false narrative that the GEC was somehow engaged in controlling political messaging, reaching the American publics, but that was enough to cause some to oppose its extension. And on December 23rd of last year, it died. There may or may not be a successor. We thought we were going to survive. We had an extension in the continuing resolution, and then kind of honored that Elon Musk and Donald Trump both tweeted about the GEC on the eve of the CR, but unfortunately that was enough to get it removed. And there are still people looking at its successors and going after it as well. Given all that, given the baggage, the history, if you are giving advice, if PDCA is giving advice, I hope so. If you are giving advice to Secretary Rubio and members of the new administration, whether we continue and how we continue to fight efforts by the PRC, Russia, Iran, and others to shape the narrative on social media, what advice would you give?
Well, the first thing I would tell them is that even if the GEC has gone away, the threat of foreign malign influence has not. And in fact, if anything, it is going to become more acute over the coming years. Carl, you know this well. You have lived this for the past however many years, decades. So I would start there. And I would encourage them to take a look at, you know, the great work that y'all did in terms of exposing and disrupting RT, for instance. The report on the PRC that analyzed their tactics and tools and really provided a roadmap for how we go about countering them. And then I would probably have a conversation with them about what they think makes the most sense. What are the challenges and the problems that they see? Because ultimately, Carl, as you know, as I think we probably all know, the narratives about the GEC are completely false and completely unfair. And it is very unfortunate for that particular team to have gotten sort of wrapped up in this because the work is critical. Work is absolutely critical. We talk about whether or not we're losing the information space, whether or not we're losing the information war. How are we supposed to win? How are we supposed to fight back if we don't have the very apparatus that allows us to expose, disrupt, and deter? We can't. We can't. So we'll see what happens in the future. You know how I feel about the Global Engagement Center and your work. So fingers crossed.
I just want to add one thing. I endorse Stephanie's view. But I just like to say that way back, as we go back between how all this stuff got started, is that we in the Foreign Service were very interested in the problems of foreign involvement in information aggression against the United States. But even before that, we were interested in how terrorists were using advanced technologies and new social media techniques to recruit and promote their activities. In fact, much of the work that became the GEC started in our efforts to defeat ISIS. And I simply want to say is that as we withdraw, hopefully temporarily, from this business of trying to separate fact from fiction over the internet, particularly where it involves foreign actors in the United States, I hope that we can find our way back to addressing these problems because, as Stephanie says, this is not going to go away. And if you're not in the game, you're not going to be taken seriously.
And I would say too, just to echo the secretary, someone else is going to fill that void, right? And very likely state or non-state actors that we don't want to play that role.
Stephanie, going back to your comment on funding,
Yeah.
as you know, we have a lot of interaction with you and your colleagues in the department, with many on the Hill, and in the private sector. And we are in the camp that believes that Department of Public Diplomacy needs a staff increase of 100%.
Thank you.
And funding increase of at least 80%.
Thank you. We'll take them both.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Greta, and if you could speak loudly.
I will try to speak very loudly. Thank you very much for your comments. Stephanie, both you and Larry have talked about existing programs, new programs that you started during this administration, but also existing programs that have been strengthened and built upon. And I'm just wondering what you think, not only the current public diplomacy officers in the department, but also organizations like the PDCA and other interested organizations can do to help continue this strengthening of public diplomacy organizations or programs within the department, but also, frankly, private sector of public diplomacy programs.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question. I think first and foremost, more conversations like this, more dialogue, more sort of understanding what the team at the State Department is focused on and how and where organizations like PDCA can help and plug in. I think that's absolutely critical, and I hope that is something that will continue in the coming years.
Again, I agree, but I do want to say one thing. This is not a think tank discussion today. We're not here for the purpose of scratching our heads about the future and all these other things. We're here to honor Secretary Blinken. And I just think that it's important that we try and stick with this idea because, in fact, we could spend hours, days, months. In fact, people never stop debating foreign policy. And if you think back about when you were in college and you studied foreign affairs or diplomatic affairs, the difference between the way it's thought about outside of our community and the way it's actually practiced and tried and implemented inside, it's extraordinarily different. So let's just focus on thanking the Secretary for what he's done and the programs that he's done. Sorry, I'm cracking you up, huh? Okay, sorry.
No, I just appreciate that Larry Schwartz is still 10 years later doing everything he can to keep us just completely honest. Thank you.
Dear.
Okay, in closing, is this still working?
Yes.
Okay. During his recent New York Times interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro, Secretary Blinken said, and I quote, "Now and in recent years, there has been a greater multiplicity, greater complexity, a greater interconnectedness of problems than ever before. And they are happening at a speed that we have never experienced before." That certainly applies to our public diplomacy. And with that, I'd like to thank today's panel and to all those who worked hard to organize today's programs. I now turn the podium over to Adam Clayton Powell, Director of Washington Programs, USC Center on Communication, Leadership, and Policy, and former PDC President. And you're going to have to share my mic.
No problem. Our next program in this series is going to be Monday, February 3rd, over in Lindner Commons. And we're going to go from talking about the public diplomacy of a country of more than 300 million people to the public diplomacy of a country of 5 million people, New Zealand. Our guest will be New Zealand's ambassador to the United States, Rosemary Banks. And I was trying to think of things that are more visible to us about New Zealand, aside from walking into the Giant, seeing a big section of New Zealand wine. They have sports. I don't know how many rugby fans are here, but the New Zealand All Blacks are global world champions. Education, New Zealand is a full member of the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, along with the United States, Canada, Japan, China, Russia, Korea, and I'm forgetting somebody, Mexico, and Singapore. So how do they do all of this? Well, what Ambassador Banks says she really wants to talk about is, okay, we've done that. What are we planning now to do next? So find out on February 3rd. Hope to see you then.